This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Right out of the box, I want to take a critical look at Orchid. Have you heard about this? It's been on the New York Times. There was a podcast. It is the latest embryo genetic testing technology, grave moral dangers. You talk about dystopian. So earlier this month, the New York Times ran a feature. It was also a podcast episode centering around Orchid. It is a Silicon Valley startup. It offers what they call embryo screening services to prospective parents. Okay, so that's important to note, that it can help select the healthiest embryos before pregnancy even begins. So the name of the actual piece is called The Next Parenting Trend Starts Before Conception. And Rouse Douthat, he sat down with Orchid's founder, her name is Noor Siddiqui, and talked about the implications of this technology. And so I wanted to bring it to your attention because this isn't new, but in a sense it is. And you'll hear why as we get into the story, a couple clips of the conversation. But in her own words, the founder, Noor Siddiqui, what does she say? Well, this is what she writes on her X account. She says, what if your baby never walks? What if they are never able to live independently? What if you could have stopped it, but chose not to? You optimize everything, career, diet, skincare, but you're going to chance it in your child's genome, one of the most significant detriments to your health. She goes on to say the most important parenting decision happens before conception. It is the difference between a child who runs and laughs and one who never walks, never talks, and dies at the age of 5. Very difficult, but I'm going to withhold comment right now. But then she goes on to describe, would you use an algorithm to select your embryos? Enter Orchid, a company that promises parents the ability to, quote unquote, protect their future children through genetic testing for embryos before pregnancy. So essentially selecting your children in advance, screening. So right out of the box, obviously we have problems, right? From a Catholic perspective, ethically, morally, all over the place. We have separation of procreation from the marital union. I mean, there's no union there at all. You're treating embryos as objects, not persons with dignity. You're promoting eugenics. I mean, they're not even hiding that. In fact, that's a selling point, selecting embryos on genetic desirability, and then the likelihood of discarding those human beings deemed less fit. Again, going back to eugenics. So I want to look at that selection process. So this is Ross Douthat and the conversation with Noor Siddiqui about the process of what she talks about is this invented protocol. So let's listen to that now.
So the first stage is, chromosomal analysis, right? So does the embryo have the correct or incorrect number of chromosomes, right? Then the next stage is monogenic analysis. So that's where we're looking for over 1,200 monogenic disorders. So these are things like birth defects, heart defects, skeletal defects. These are pediatric cancers, adult onset cancers. These are neurodevelopmental disorders. These are where, over the last 20 years, geneticists have cataloged, hey, there's this specific gene, a specific variant, and it leads to this disorder.
So, I mean, it's just modern eugenics, plain and simple. And I'll say, throughout the conversation, about 45 minutes in length, she's very friendly, she's very kind and warm. But again, there's this clear message that some lives are worth more than others. As Cardinal Sarah talks about that, he said there's a prejudice against the disabled, against the weak, against the unborn. It is a dictatorship of perfection. In other words, suffering is not only intolerable, but if you're a good parent, you should seek to eliminate it altogether. And so you have this model built on utility, the idea that a child's worth is measured by this genetic fitness. And so then they go on to discuss the personal implications of this technology. And what's ironic is that Noor Siddiqui's mother, she was inspired to found this because of her mother's condition, which was a genetic congenital disorder in which she went blind. But her own tech would have essentially selected her mother for elimination. And she wouldn't exist. And so Ross asks her about that. Take a listen, clip 2.
You are promoting a technology that has profoundly, potentially transformative effects on society. Clearly, you're arguing for it because it has beneficial effects. And you are essentially saying, you don't know what's going to happen to all the extra embryos. Who can possibly say it's just up to people? We know in practice what is likely to happen, right? And
I don't
feel
think
like
that's true.
I feel like I'd like to know what you think about the moral status of the embryo. Isn't that something I should be able to know? Like just to go back to the example you talked about, right? With your mother and her illness, right? In the world you're describing, your mother would exist as an embryo, right? Not your mother as an adult human being, your mother as an embryo. And someone running an orchid-style program would look at that embryo and say, we're not going to implant that embryo. Does that bother you at all? Would you say, oh, I'd like to have my mother have a chance at life through some kind of low probability, compassionate injection? Are you comfortable with that embryo being frozen or discarded? What's your actual view?
Look, that question has, again, extremely dishonest framing and dichotomous reasoning. So let me just walk you through my grandma's life situation. So do you support women or girls getting the chance to finish high school? Do you support girls getting the chance to choose who they marry and when they marry, right? Well, my grandma
somebody's doing some dishonest framing here, but I don't think it's me.
Yeah, so no direct answer to the actual question, and he does further press her, but this manipulation of human life is at the core. We have so much with us that we can use to point back to truth. And that's why I wanted to point it out, because it is important that we have the right language in order to combat what is increasingly just being put forth as casual or a miracle. And I mean, her push is that this should be available to everyone, to all people. It's a healthcare issue, which we know it is not. But the Vatican instruction on bioethics, what does it say? It says procedures such as what we're talking about reflect a shameful and utterly reprehensible eugenic mentality. Such a view is incompatible with the dignity of the human person. And going back to our good shepherd, Cardinal Sarah, he says the manipulation of life, the creation of children in laboratories, the selection of embryos, these are crimes against humanity. When man tries to take the place of God, he becomes a destroyer. And the end of the interview was really disturbing. This is the concluding thought at the end of the conversation. Take a listen, clip 3.
I think that if you have, enormous genetic privilege, and for you to roll the dice and to get a, outcome that isn't going to lead to disease is in the cards for you, then of course, go ahead and roll the dice. It's just that I think that the vast majority of parents in the future are not going to want to roll the dice with their child's health. They're going to see it as, taking the maximum amount of care, the maximum amount of love, in the same way that they, plan their nursery, plan their home, plan their preschool. All of these decisions are actually, extremely insignificant in terms of the difference between, is your child going to live with pediatric cancer, with a heart defect that we can't surgically fix, with born without a skull and never going to be able to make it to their first birthday. I think when people think about it really concretely in terms of what are they giving up, what are the risks that could potentially affect this child, I think that then it becomes about stewardship. It becomes about, how do I make a responsible choice for my family? How do I make sure that my child doesn't have to suffer in the same way that I do, in the same way that my sibling does, in the same way that, my parent that I'm a caregiver for does. So, I think sex is obviously a very beautiful thing. It's a very profound part of the human experience. But I think that it's, denigrating and dismissive to IVF parents and to IVF babies to say that somehow, science babies are, inferior to babies that are, made the old-fashioned way.
But not denigrating to those who might have special needs or any imperfection, right? So there's where you have to look at inversions. And that's kind of the stamp of the diabolical, because she literally was talking about eliminating human beings, creating them, discarding them, destroying them, and saying that that's an act of stewardship. And boy, it was so hard, because as a mom of a special needs child, it's like a sword in the heart, but then you also hear this hubris, this clear modern eugenics to dismiss the intrinsic value of those who have any sort of genetic imperfection. And the irony is, even though in the case of my daughter, she might carry a clinical diagnosis of intellectual disability, there is profound clarity for her in how much she loves life and loves. And I think, to Mrs. Siddiqui, maybe she's the one that's actually handicapped in the sense that she doesn't maybe have cognitive limitations, but there is a refusal to see. There is a blindness of not seeing and protecting the sacredness of life. So it's not healthcare, but eugenics and commodifying human beings. The reason that I'm sharing it, though, is because I think it's important as Catholics, we defend truth. We value logic and reason. And so these are hard issues to talk about, but also we need to be rooted in truth and ready to defend it. And so, just going back to the bioethics, to the dignity of the human person. And I think more than anything, the prayer, the intercession of Our Lady of Guadalupe, perhaps, opening the hearts of those involved in this grave moral sin, like the heart of Miss Siddiqui. We pray for those on the front lines of the pro-life practitioners, volunteers, those who help infertile couples pursue the path of church teaching. And, I just want to say, as a word of encouragement, as someone who experienced 4 miscarriages and years of infertility, I understand the sensitive challenges. I've been there, but I think for us, that's also been the beauty of learning about the life-saving teaching of the church. It wasn't a no. It was this incredible yes, that makes sense. I get it. Because we are living in weird times and we're being offered all of these things to, kind of cure our suffering or ease our pain, such as infertility. But the gift of the church, following those teachings, and then for us, the miracle of adoption, healthy pregnancy after secondary infertility, and a total of 5 children. God always has a plan when we're faithful. So for sure, just to continue to pray.
You can join me and listen on the Relevant Radio app to Trending with Timmerie live each weekday at 6 p.m. Central. Thanks for listening.